Chapter 17. If it tickles, keep laughing. Meep and Catomancy made haste to find the rest of the group. They needed Rosalie and Calvin to understand what was happening. They needed Greer and Molly McBottoms to get the Rose of San Juan Capistrano ready for this battle. Heck, they needed help just understanding each other. And then Meep realized he didn't like to be seen or noticed by humans, and so that left only Catomancy to trek back to the retreat and convey this whole thing. He stumbled out onto the marked path to the Hidden Foot Tavern and straight into management only. "Get out of here, you dratted cat!" The old guy shook his fist and wheezed as he pulled out a cigarette and lit it with the strike of a match on the back of his shoe. The smell of brimstone went up in the air, and Catomancy grimaced. He ran away from management only, careful to conceal his destination, since they'd made it very clear about the no pets thing. He shimmied up a rose trellis rather than just teleporting himself back into the room. The rose trellis thing was more fun to his cat countenance. The room inside was empty except for the light coming out from under the door of the closet and the sound of Calvin singing in the shower. He was most likely getting ready for his meetup in the Forest of Forbidden Bears later that night. But they might not even have that long to wait, Catomancy thought. If they could stop Mr. S in advance, then maybe this whole problem was all sorted out all along. Then maybe this was the whole problem all along. They just needed a little plan to get the Rose of SJC into action, and then it might be the end of this whole silly affair. Catomancy slipped into the closet and could see Greer and Molly McBottoms watering the rose. Its petals looked slightly wilted, and Greer was sure the fireplace and hot heat in the room were the cause. He didn't have the misting fans he used back home, and that always added just the perfect amount of moisture to the air. Catomancy filled them in on what he'd seen, and also that they might have an ally in Meep if they could get him to come out of hiding. Just then a knock at the suite door pulled them out of their planning. "One moment," Calvin said, coming out of the bathroom with only a towel wrapped around his waist. But no need for pleasantries. A note was slipped under the door, and then footsteps running down the hallway were confirmed. Calvin reached out to pick up the note, unfolding it to find these words. "The woods are no longer safe for our meeting. Instead, come to the kitchen door at the Hidden Foot Tavern at precisely 9 p.m. I'll be waiting." Oh, not another change, Calvin thought. This was beginning to feel like a wild goose chase, clues leading nowhere, and now this change of plans. Rosalie slipped inside the suite, her forehead damp from running about the trail, trying to follow the girl from earlier. She had lost her down a steep decline that went off trail and deeper into the woods, she told Calvin. Calvin showed her the note, and she agreed. She was tired of this cat and mouse game. Something needed to give. But Greer, Molly, and Catomancy had heard enough. The Rose of SJC must be made ready for travel and be sitting there at the kitchen door to the Hidden Foot Tavern precisely at 9 p.m. tonight. There was no question about it. Tonight was the night. Chapter 18. Do I know you? 8:45, and everyone was ready. Now, how to get the Rose of SJC down the trail to the Hidden Foot Tavern? The rose, plumped and prepped for journey, had been placed in its protective container, and the trio, Molly, Greer, and Catomancy, were waiting for a sign. They knew one was coming, and then if by magic, which of course it was, the sign showed up, a magical breeze blew in through the open patio door, and in flew the biggest crow they had ever seen. "I've been sent here to assist," the crow said, hiding his true self from them. "You seem so familiar," Molly McBottoms said to the crow. "Do I know you?" The crow cawed a little wickedly, and with a glint in his eye said most dryly, "I don't know, do you?" And like that, she was smitten. Molly, who'd lived her entire life in the little cottage garden inside Rosalie's spare bedroom, and in the outside patio garden many millennia before that, was gobsmacked. Something about this crow. "How did you find me? I mean us," she smiled. No time for that now. The crow's eyes glinted in the dusky light of the room. Get that rose on my back and then hop on. We've got to get going. Greer and Molly tied the rose of SJC in its special container onto the crow's back as Catomancy kept watch. Rosalie and Calvin had already prepared themselves and were trekking along the marked path towards the Hidden Foot Tavern's kitchens. "And what should we call you?" Molly said, finishing the ties on the rose container. "Call me what you want," he said, flapping his wings, "but for goodness sake, get on and let's go." Molly thought for a moment as a distant memory flooded her heart. "I think I'll call you Orion." "No, how about Ben?" "Yes, I think Ben suits you just fine." And so Orion Ben the Crow, Molly, Greer, and the Rose of SJC lifted flight out of the suite and through the open patio door, with Catomancy flanking the group on foot. They actually made it to the Hidden Foot Tavern first, flying deftly over Rosalie and Calvin, who were none the wiser as the pair were trying to intuit what was to happen next. Orion Ben landed very adeptly at the back door and positioned themselves so they could see and hear everything at the threshold. And a few minutes later, Rosalie and Calvin emerged from the path precisely as the little clock tower at the Whistling Gulch church struck 9 p.m. The door to the Hidden Foot Tavern kitchen creaked open. Rosalie held her breath. Calvin held a small can of pepper spray in his pocket. The Rose of SJC inhaled. Molly and Greer readied themselves. Catomancy yawned. Oh. And Orion Ben looked at Molly from the corner of his eye. A bear person appeared with a small cap on his head. He smiled at Rosalie and Calvin. "Thank you for coming. I have something to show you," the bear person said, holding out his paw hand. And there, in the middle of the furry paw, was a heart. The heart was beating, it seemed, but just barely. "I found this last night. It's a sign of what's to come, but only if we can stop this madness," the bear said, handing the heart to Rosalie. But what? But how did you get this? What is this?" Rosalie said, taken aback by the heart in her hands. "This is how we will stop the darkness that has taken over the town," the bear person said. "I have a plan, but first I must tell you what I know." And so the Rose of SJC exhaled a little. Whew. And Molly and Greer relaxed. Catomancy yawned again, and Orion Ben gave Molly a wink. Rosalie and Calvin stepped inside the Hidden Foot Tavern kitchen as Molly gently held the small beating heart in her palm. The love from the little heart made her feel warm and comforted inside as she and Calvin settled into a table set with the bear's beloved china. The bear person served honeysuckle tea and huckleberry scones as he proceeded to tell them the story of the forbidden bears and how they had come to be, their purpose, and how everyone in the room that night could help change the world. Chapter 19. A sly smile and then magic. Mr. S. was sure that someone was plotting against him. He felt like there was a magic brewing that he couldn't quite comprehend. It had a sparkly feeling, and he didn't like sparkly. He turned on his cloven heel and started to dance. The dance macabre was not one of his best, but it would have to do. He was tired of waiting. He wanted his just rewards. Why were Dark Orders taking so long to acknowledge all his hard work? He didn't know, and frankly, he didn't care. He didn't need Dark Orders. He was his own slewfoot. He would take matters into his own hands and end this right now. But in the middle of his death ballet, a strange feeling came over him. Why again was he doing this? His head felt funny, and his stomach grumbled. He'd been taking orders from Dark Orders for so long, and now felt like the first real thoughts he was having for himself. Did he like being a bad guy? Did he like living in the forest of forbidden bears? Did he like being evil? too many questions and no answers, since he was so used to someone else always telling him what the answers should be. He wrung his hands together and smiled slyly, as if making a smirk for the annual Dark Order's photo shoot. He decided not to decide on any of those questions. But that was okay too, wasn't it? Well, yes and no, for not deciding was a decision, but something was coming that would push him out of his comfort zone and into action, and that something wouldn't care if he was a sprite, a bear person, a human, or a rose. Something was coming, and his plans would have to be altered when it did arrive. He might even be reassigned to somewhere new. But Mr. S., who'd made no plans for himself, was inadvertently setting himself up for a shock, because in this case, it was in his best interest to carefully ponder the aforementioned questions, and to be very sure he knew in his own heart the answer to each and every one of them.